Hi there, welcome to another Wednesday night writing workshop. I'm Jeremy Dover. This last Wednesday night writing workshop of the semester. We made it, we're here. And our big thing for the day is revising your own work. And so we've put together actually 3 different things for you. First is just some general best practices, things to be thinking about, best ways to approach revising your own work. Second is kind of a pre-flight checklist. So here's all the things really well organized and with some additional resources, all the different things to double and triple check right before you turn in that essay. And the last thing I put together was just a really quick short guide for some strategies for writing stronger, sharper, even more academic sounding sentences when you're revising that paper. All right. So starting first, proofreading, revising your own work, best practices. So really ironically, the first and most best practice for revising your own work is not to do it alone. And the way I even want to pitch this is I help folks revise essays really for a living. That's what I do. But the moment that I write something that I know is important to me, like let's say a resume or a cover letter, as soon as I'm done writing that thing, I give it to someone else. And the reason I do that, I give it to someone who's even, their job is not to help people revise writing for a living. The reason I do that is I know that whenever I'm looking at my own writing, I'm always looking at it knowing what I'm trying to say. And so the best thing I can do is to give my writing to someone else who doesn't actually know what I'm trying to say, who has to figure out what I'm trying to say as they read it on the page. And so I can't recommend this enough. And when you're looking for someone else to read through your own work, really feel free to come to us at the Academic Support Center, or find a friend who's in the class, or even just go to a friend or family member who you trust with your writing. Because it is one of those just unfortunate, unavoidable biases that whenever we're looking at our own writing, we know what we're trying to say, and we kind of project that onto it. And so we've got to get it in front of someone who doesn't know what we're trying to say, so we can hear what they see in our writing. I've included actually these 3 questions just as kind of jumping off points. These are good jumping off points for asking someone who's looking at your writing. And I'm going to talk a little about what each one's for. So first is just, okay, what makes sense in the essay? Second, what parts don't make sense? And last is what sentences aren't doing their work, what sentences aren't as clear as they could be. So this first part, what makes the most sense in this essay? We're trying to do 2 things here, two reasons for asking someone that's reading your work this question. First is people are generally kind of polite, and we're trying to break that politeness a little bit with this first question. If you give someone an essay and just ask them to read it, they might just give it right back to you and say, it looks great, because they're, out of a kind of politeness. So the first thing we're doing is basically trying to be like, okay, what's your read on what I wrote? What's making sense to you? How are you thinking about this? How are you understanding the thing that I'm talking about? And if you listen really closely to the answer that someone gives just to this first question, you'll hear a few things. First, you'll hear what they get exactly right, which is great, because now it's like, all right, that part of the argument I have down. They were able to explain it exactly perfectly. I know I don't have to spend as much time with this section of my essay in the revision. They also might start misreading and misrepresenting what you wrote, and that's also great. Now you know, okay, this is the part of the essay I have to take that second look to really figure out how can I add a couple sentences, maneuver this around a little bit so that now that I know someone can misunderstand it in this way, how can I make it more clear, less able for someone to misunderstand what I'm saying right here. Last thing, if you listen really, really close when someone gives you their read of your essay, you can often hear what they're not talking about. So they might be talking about this part of your essay, really great, this part of your essay, totally get. If there's some big thing that you're just not hearing them talk about, that at the very least can be worth a quick follow-up question, like what about that part? Or even that might be exactly the part that's worth going back to and being like, okay, how can I make this stronger, more interesting, more connected to the rest of my essay? Because this is the thing that was getting overlooked. Second 2 questions. In fancy teacher theory, what we're trying to do here is get our reader to think globally and locally. What that means globally, first, we want the person reading our work to tell us what big picture stuff, what global stuff in the essay they think needs more work, whether that's a paragraph that's a little off topic, a part of the argument that's not clear, or even something that's just kind of getting in the way of the overall big structure of the essay. And then we also want to ask our reader to give us some feedback about local stuff. What sentences, what really small details are starting to get in the way? What punctuation or grammar-y things can we come back to? My last small pitch with this is, if you give your essay to someone who's like not 100% a professional with reading essays, readers are generally really good at finding something that's not working. They're not always the best at giving you the right solution. I've even seen it sometimes where someone will find correctly that this sentence is not working, but then accidentally kind of turn it into a new grammar mistake by trying to solve it. All right. Our next two best practices, aside from, for sure, getting someone else to look at our work, not trying to revise our work totally alone, is basically about trying to get new eyes, fresh eyes on the writing that we're doing. Here's the way I kind of want to frame this. Give me a quick thumbs up, any of y'all, if you've ever had this experience before, where you're like driving to work for the millionth time and you just kind of all of a sudden are there, to the point where it's like, how did I do that? I zoned out. Yep, some thumbs up. The reason that happens is, thanks for the thumbs up, yeah. The reason that happens is our brains are programmed when things look familiar to just kind of zone out. And our brains are trying to help us. They're like, okay, I'm pretty sure I know what's here on this roadside, so I'm not going to pay that much attention. I know what's there. Let's get to work. The same thing happens, really unfortunately, when we're reading our own essays. So the big thing that we're doing in all of these best practices is to try to find basically a different way to drive to work so we can trick our brains into paying more attention. The best way I have to do that is to literally print out the paper and read it, print out the essay and read it on a sheet of paper. It will do this kind of magic trick for you, where you'll find all kinds of stuff you want to fix, all kinds of stuff where you're like, I can't believe I missed that on the screen, just because we've driven a slightly different way to work looking at that essay. If you do print it out, which I honestly think is the best way to get a fresh set of eyes on an essay, try out reading it twice. First normally, and then second out loud. When you read the essay out loud, here's the things to listen for. As you read it out loud and listen to your own voice, is there anywhere where your voice gets kind of lost, kind of stuck, kind of confused? That's almost always because that sentence, that part of the essay is not working on the page. It's kind of lost, kind of confused on the page too. The other best thing to listen for in your own voice as you read the essay out loud is if you ever feel like your voice is getting bumpy, like it's starting and stopping like a car in traffic. That almost always means that that part of the essay needs some more transitions, because right now the sentences are starting over with a new idea. We need some transitions between them to get that kind of great essay flow. If you do those two things, read on paper, read out loud, we've driven to work in two different ways, and we're going to catch just a whole heck of a lot more in those essays. Last, if you can't print the essay, this is the second best thing I've found, which is, I don't know why this works, but exporting it to a PDF and then reading it in PDF format. Something about it, all of the bells and whistles alongside the margins are suddenly gone. It kind of reshapes the margins and letters a tiny bit, just enough so that now it looks a little different. Our brain stops just forgetting what's there and on our way to work and starts paying more attention again. The other way to do that is changing the font, the view size, the margins temporarily, but really the PDF, for whatever reason, PDF format I found works better, and even better than that, printing the essay altogether. Before I jump to this fourth additional proofreading tips, I want to show you one last thing, just so you can really visually see the challenges of proofreading your own work. So we know first, when I'm reading my own work, I know what I'm saying, which gives me this kind of blind spot bias. I also, just like driving to work, am filtering stuff out without even knowing it, because my brain is taking out familiarity. Last thing that works against us is that our brains are more built to make sense out of things, which means they aren't always great at catching things that aren't actually making sense. So for example, this sentence, I bet if you try it out, if you read that in your head, you can do it. Even though, yep, I'm getting some nods, yeah, even though it is for sure wrong and nonsense. The This last tip here is really for if you ever have one of those things where you want literally every word, every punctuation mark perfect, like an email to a potential employer, a CV, a cover letter. These are the two best ways I have for taking a real fine-tooth comb through some writing. First is to read it backwards, by which I don't mean word by word so that it's all nonsense, but sentence by sentence. So last sentence first, second to last sentence next, sentence before that, sentence before that. Part of what that does is it cuts against our brain's ability to do that. We're breaking up our brain's ability to make meaning out of the sentences, so our brain just looks at just that one sentence and makes sure that everything's perfect in the sentence. Similarly, this is an even finer tooth comb, the old-fashioned finger method of literally putting our finger under each word, going word by word, so that we're trying to, again, slow down our brain as much as possible, take a different way to work, and actually see what we've written on the page. Those are all the best practices that I have, at least, for revising our own work, and most of them really are most of them really are about cutting against these biases that we have. We know what we're trying to say. Our brain filters stuff out, and our brain's trying to make sense. So we're trying always to get fresh eyes, and ideally even someone else's eyes on our work. All right, part two, after part two, quick break. Part two is a kind of pre-flight checklist. So we've included even some resources for each one of these things. So if any of them feel a little murky, you have some more resources for each of these items. If you're watching on YouTube, most of these resources are other YouTube videos in this same channel. The way I want to pitch this is, so pre-flight checklist, before pilots take off, they have a checklist of all these things to kind of double, triple check that probably are fine, but it's a plane, so it's worth doing that kind of double, triple check just to make sure all that stuff's right. As I understand it, surgeons also have one of those lists where it's like, okay, double, triple check, probably it's fine, but let's make sure because it's surgery, right? And if I could be wrong about this, but I really do think one of the things on the surgery checklist is double check that it's the right person to get surgeried. And so here's our similar pre-flight checklist for turning in an essay. You've done all the work, so let's double, triple check this stuff because it's an essay, it's important. I've tried also to kind of organize these in order of more or less of most important, down. So first, most important is to double and triple check that everything that needs to be cited is cited. This is by far the most important, and I talk a little more about this in exactly this YouTube video, both how to cite, what to cite, even how to cite when you're doing multiple sources in one paragraph, when you're doing one source over a lot of sentences. This is the most important thing to double, triple check on our pre-flight essay checklist, because it's the place you have the most to lose. It's one of having an accidental plagiarism is one of the few ways where you can end up with a 0 on an essay that you actually did. And it's one of the really only ways that something can go wrong in an essay that affects a whole academic career. So this is the thing that more than anything else on this list is worth that double and triple check. And again, we talk a little more about that right here, how to know exactly what to cite. But the general rule of thumb is if you learned it in research, we're going to cite it. So anything learned in research, we're going to double check. We have that with the citation really clearly cited right before or right after. This is the kind of general formula for citing, because the only exception to that is common knowledge, which means something that's in 100,000 textbooks and we wouldn't even know where to cite it from. If you're not sure if it's common knowledge or an information that you learned from a source, cite it, because the worst that can happen if you cite something you don't have to cite is you just vaguely annoy a professor. That's literally the worst that can happen. Whereas the worst that can happen if we don't cite something we need to is really a different order of magnitude. All right, so we've double checked all the stuff we learned in the research, all the stuff we figured out from reading this research is clearly cited in the essay. Next, we're just gonna double, triple check that it's cited the right way, whether it's MLA, APA, in-text citation, reference, if we're doing APA, title page, all that. The only thing I really quick wanna do for the folks on YouTube is show you all where this is. This is our guide for doing that citation stuff. So I'm going to switch the screen Did that work? Give me a thumbs up. It's a different screen. Okay, cool. All right, so if I literally Google Aurora University Academic Support Center, citing sources, that's where that link is. For those of you at YouTube, a whole guide for doing APA MLA citation. Right, give me a quick thumbs up. Are we back to the document? Great. So everything that needs to be cited is cited. It's cited the right way. Last thing we're going to double check, we're going to look for any of these. We sometimes call them quote islands, which is a sentence that begins exactly right there with a quote. So your English teachers might sometimes talk about quote integration. What that basically means is, okay, how smooth is the transition from your writing right into the quote? If it's a quote island like this, the quote integration is kind of like 0%. It's not integrated at all. It's all alone by itself. Right here, if you want, and again, if you're on YouTube, this is one of the videos, right next door. In here, we talk about how to do all that with building body paragraphs, how to do more of that quote integration. The really easy ways for this are, according to author's name argues, or according to the article, that kind of thing. But there's a whole lot better ways to kind of put these quotes to get these quotes more integrated with the rest of the essay. I'm happy to talk more about that at the end of today, but note too, there's a whole lot of good strategies right there for making those quotes more integrated with the whole paragraph. All right, that's all our citation stuff. First, most important, everything that needs to be cited is cited, everything cited the right way, and all the research is really well integrated with our own words. All right, this is probably the second place where I think folks can end up losing the most points on an essay. The next part of our pre-flight checklist is to double check the prompt, rubric, and any feedback from the professor. So I know from experience, writing prompts for class, writing assignments for the classroom, that as course instructors, we try to fit a whole lot of information in a really concise place when we're describing what we want in the assignment. And I also know from being a student that when I was a student at least, I would sometimes scan through that, breeze through it and be like, all right, I kind of get it. And it's so easy doing those two things, just scanning through this bulk of really concise information to miss like one word that ends up being an important part of the assignment and, tragically is a loss later. If you've ever had me in a one-on-one appointment where we're like just starting off the essay, doing some brainstorming, one of the first things we'll do is we'll literally take apart the prompt. So let's say the prompt is something like explore the causes, outcomes, and additional implications. Well, all right, let's put some liberal enter space breaks there. In this essay, explore the enter, causes, enter, outcomes, enter, other implications. That way we can more visually see, okay, these three really close together words need to be three big parts of the essay. It's really worth doing that, breaking apart the prompt. If you can't do it in a Microsoft Word document, doing it on the page with underlines, squares, all that, to see, okay, what's literally every word here that's important that I have to cover in this essay. This is worth doing in that revision process. Again, second place, it's the place where we tend to lose the most points. So we've broken apart, here's all the stuff that I know for sure I need to cover in this essay. Try then out giving yourself a really quick, intuitive scale of 1 to 5. How much do you think you covered each of those bases? We can do the same thing with the rubric, and those two things, how well do I think I did it based on the prompt? Quick, intuitive scale of 1 to 5. Quick, intuitive scale of 1 to 5 on the rubric will often really show you exactly what needs more work with the essay, really precisely what you got to do next. And sometimes it'll even mean like, okay, I didn't cover this part of the prompt, so I got to add a new paragraph, or I got to add just a couple sentences, or sadly, I have to add a whole new section. But doing this is so worth it because it's way more tragic to, again, from my experience, miss one of those words, turn it in, and just not realize that you did all this work, and because you missed one word on the prompt, you lost, just this whole bucket load of points on the rubric. This is so important that I honestly recommend doing it twice. First, at the very beginning of going from rough draft to or from your rough draft to the draft you're going to turn in, and then a second time right before you turn it in to do those 2 gradings of yourself. You will be surprised by how much immediate useful feedback that gives you. Okay, we've done all our citing, covered all our bases in the prompt. Last is double checking some stuff with the essay structure in our pre-flight essay checklist. Starting with the introduction. So the big thing that we're checking for with the introduction is, does the introduction match the essay that I actually wrote? And this is especially important if you write introductions first, because it's especially common if you write the introduction first to end up writing a slightly different essay, which is actually a great problem to have. Because what that means is that as you were writing the essay, you were making more connections, you were even further developing your ideas, you were finding more nuance in what you were arguing. And it's a really easy solution, which is that you just need a different introduction that actually matches the essay you wrote. And it's kind of, I think, one of the most satisfying problems, because it's like, all right, I wrote a better essay than I started off introducing. Now I got to write an introduction that kind of fits this better essay that I ended up putting together. Same thing for the thesis statement. And we're going to actually check 3 things with the thesis statement. First, that what I say in my thesis statement matches exactly what I ended up arguing in my essay, or if not, it needs some tinkering. Second, after we've broken apart the prompt, and part of why we did that is to be able to double check that our thesis statement itself is covering at all, or at least most, of those points in the prompt. And if not, it also needs some tinkering. The last thing to double check with the thesis, and I don't want to get too hung up on this in this particular workshop, is double checking that it's an argumentative thesis. The best way that I think our kind of rule of thumb with that is asking, is this thesis something someone could reasonably disagree with? So what we don't want if we're making an argumentative essay is a thesis that is just kind of generally accepted as true, or just really likely probably true. A really good thesis actually risks being proven wrong eventually. A good thesis, at the very least, risks other people being able to disagree with you. And again, we have I think, wonderful video here that talks a little more about setting up both introductions and thesis statements. If that feels a little murky, really feel free to check that out. Last thing I'll say is if you're ever struggling with the thesis statement, I think this is one of those things that's really hard to talk about abstractly and way easier to do in one of those, in a one-on-one. So if you ever are having trouble figuring out how to make a thesis statement more argumentative, we can absolutely do that with you at the Academic Support Center. All right. Last 2 things on our pre-flight essay checklist. First, making sure at the beginning of each paragraph is a clear topic sentence. If you've seen me before in these videos, I love topic sentences and have talked about them in a couple of videos. Here's a link to one of them on building better body paragraphs. So in that video, I talk a little more about how topic sentences work and even some really easy kind of go-to strategies for setting them up if you're ever struggling to get one set up in an essay. Here's what I want to talk about today with topic sentences and part of why they're on the pre-flight checklist. If at the very beginning of each paragraph is a topic sentence that really clearly shows the reader, this is what this paragraph is going to talk about, part of what that does for you is when your course instructor is reading your essay and it's like the 75th essay they've read that day, as they're going through, they're like, all right, in this paragraph, I get it. I get what this is about. Check, you covered it on the rubric. Next paragraph, oh, at the very beginning, I know what you're saying. Check, you covered that on the rubric. It's a nice, easy way to just for sure pick up a few more points because we're helping out the instructor to see what each part of our essay is doing, how it matches the assignment, and how it all kind of fits together. Last thing on our in-flight checklist, and then I'll check in if you all have any questions on this so far. Last thing on the pre-flight checklist is to double check that all our paragraphs are divided the right way. That each paragraph is just about one thing, one topic. I once actually asked a student how she thought of paragraphs, and the way she described it, I loved and thought it was the best, most intuitive way to think of paragraphs. The way she put it was that she said, I kind of think of a paragraph like a scene in a movie, where there's those small cuts back and forth, and all of a sudden there's like a big cut and we're in a different place, we're in a different scene. And that I think is a wonderful way to exactly kind of think about the paragraphs as we're looking through revising the essay. It's like, okay, the small cuts are those sentences back and forth. Where's the big cut where we're in a different scene, where we're kind of somewhere else. The reason this is on the, and there's a video there that talks more about building body paragraphs. The reason this is on the pre-flight essay checklist is this is the thing that can often show you any structural problems with an essay. If you go through and start being like, oh, here, I think I start talking about a new thing. This is a new scene. And so too here, what you'll start to see is that, okay, this paragraph's a little shorter. So maybe this is the paragraph that needs, a little more expanding. Or now that I've cut this paragraph, does it even make sense here? Maybe it needs to go somewhere else in the essay. Putting these two things together, looking for any paragraph breaks anywhere where we're changing scene, changing topic, and then adding those topic sentences will do a whole lot of work helping to kind of organize an essay by itself or see if there's anything structurally amiss with an essay. All right, that's end of part 2. Let me check in with all of you. Any questions on any of that we talked about so far? Any of it feeling murky? Anything you just want me to talk more about? Nods no. All right, you go.
Jeremy, this is great so far. I didn't know, did you want to add the link to the this document after your presentation?
100%. We'll put this in the chat immediately afterwards.
Excellent. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. I want to frame this in a really particular way, which is these are not always rules. These are not dogmatic commandments to always do. These are experimental tools to sometimes experiment with to see if it helps. So if you ever have a sentence that you're really unhappy with, or even just as you're going through an essay, these are some things to kind of keep in the back of your mind as tools in your pocket that you can use when you're revising a sentence. And it's really just 3 strategies, 3 tools for building sentences that are a little stronger, a little punchier, and even just generally a little more academic sounding. This first one is my best trick, honestly, for making sentences just a little stronger, which is to look for any this, its, or even to look to some of those that's and see if you can put in something more specific. The reason this works is kind of related to that big theme that we've been talking about with revising our own work. When we're writing, we know what we're trying to say, we know what we're thinking about, and so we sometimes use shorthand. This, like, all the stuff that I was talking about before. It, like all the stuff that I'm kind of thinking about right now. So these words are really often opportunities on the page to put down more of what you're thinking about and make it more clear, and give a bigger picture to the reader of what you've already kind of thought about on the actual page. So let's start here. If you all want, feel free to jump in. We're going to revise the sentence a couple ways. So this shows that having a college degree is important. If any of you have an idea, you're welcome to jump in. I'm not going to put you on the spot. You don't have to. But this shows that having a college degree is important. If you have an idea of something we could put in place what might show that a college degree is important? What might do that work? What might be showing college degrees are important? Give me a quick thumbs up if y'all, or thumbs down if y'all don't want to be on the YouTube for this portion. If y'all don't want to be doing this interactively. A quick check-in, like, do y'all want to do this together or just have me kind of walk through? All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to take out that this, we're trying to figure out what might actually be showing, what specific thing might show that having a college degree is important. All right, so here's what I came up with. Decades of studies show that having a college degree is important. We're just trying to put on the page, what's the thing, what's the it, what's the this standing in for? And we'll do a kind of magic trick. We're already, just listen to the quick difference between between these two. This shows that having a college degree is important. Decades of studies show that having a college degree is important. We haven't changed really any of the ideas, none of the structure. All we did was pick on that one this, and the sentence got a whole lot clearer, sharper, punchier, more academic sounding. All right, here's our next thing we're going to look to. We're going to look to the verbs of the sentence. And if that like rings a really distant bell from grammar school, verbs are all those actions in a sentence. And part of the reason why we're looking at them first after the this is and its is verbs almost always, they're not just showing action, they're showing relationships between things. So like he likes her, the car, hit the other car, I owe my friend money. All our verbs in the essay are actually showing how things are related together. And so if you have a lot of really vague, hard to picture generic verbs, you might end up with a whole lot of vague, generic, kind of hard to picture relationships. If we look at some of those more generic verbs and try to make them even more specific, more concrete, more particular, it can make the essay jump out a little more by making those relationships a little more specified. All right, so here's even real quick, just a list of some commonly used generic verbs. And again, these are not always rules. These are sometimes tools to look to as you're going through reading your essay. Here's some of those more generic verbs. Have, has, had, was, were, be, been, being, am, is, are, makes, shows, does, said, says. Here's, and on the next page too, here's a whole list, a little mini thesaurus that you'll have at the end of the day of better substitutes for the verb says and better substitutes for the verb shows. So in our sentence, we're going to pick on, we got two kind of vague verbs. Decades of studies show that having a college degree is important. So part of what we're trying to do is, okay, let's figure out what's actually happening. Like decades of studies, what are they doing? Or even having a college degree, like, okay, what does that mean to have a college degree? Like, you graduating from college? Are you obtaining a degree? Are you, going, like, successfully going through college? What are the actual actions happening here? What are the actual relationships? Give me just in the sidebar, quick scale of 1 to 5, 5 totally with you, 1 pretty murky. How's this feeling? I can't tell so far. Please do give me scale 1 to 5, 5 totally with you, 1 pretty murky. 5, all right, cool. So here's one way to do it. Decades of studies demonstrate that having a college degree is important, or decades of studies demonstrate that obtaining a college degree is important. So again, we're just picking on how can we make these verbs even more particular, more concrete, more easy to picture, turning our having to obtaining, our showing to demonstrate. There's this mini thesaurus again. All right, so we've specified our verbs. Here's the last thing we can look to make even more specific, any generic sounding nouns, descriptions, or ideas. Here's the one I'm going to pick on in this sentence, important. So how is it important? Like, how could we actually, it's tough to picture that, right? It's tough to picture something being generally important. So how can we make that easier to picture, more particular, more specific, or even in this case, how could we make that something that we could measure, something that we could actually prove to be the case? And I'm going a little fast through this because we're, I think, close to the end of the day. So here's what we could do. Well, having a college degree is important because it's, long-term financial gains and also you have additional opportunities. So here's what we can do with the sentence. Decades of studies demonstrate that obtaining a college degree correlates to long-term financial gain and additional job opportunities. This is just a quick kind of review of all we did. We looked for any its, this is, and a couple that's. Looked at the verbs of the sentence. How could we specify those, make those even more concrete, easier to picture? And then last did that with any generic sounding ideas, descriptions, ideas, nouns, yep. And here's what we did. We started with a sentence that said, this shows that having a college degree is important, which is, it's fine. And we ended with, decades of studies demonstrate that obtaining a college degree correlates to long-term financial gain and additional job opportunities. And so I wanted you just to see these 3 tools, these 3 really easy ways to pick at sentences, whether it's a sentence you really just don't like in a revision, or if you're going through the whole essay, keep some of these tools in the back of your brain. Where are those thises and its? Where are any verbs that I can make even, that are kind of generic sounding, hard to picture? Any other ideas, descriptions, nouns, hard to picture? Because right here, without changing the sentence structure at all, changing really very quite little in terms of the ideas of it, what we're able to do is get all of those ideas that we already had more on the page. Last thing I'll say with this, what these 3 tricks really are about is in some ways kind of tricking us to put more of our thinking on the page. And when we do that, when we trick ourselves to put more of our own ideas concretely, specifically on the page, that ends up making it easier and clearer and more vivid for the reader to picture as well, for the person reading our work. All right. So for those of you at the YouTube, we're closing out. Here's what we did today. We looked at general best practices, ways to think about revising, especially getting new eyes, ideally having someone else help us out, a pre-flight checklist, all the stuff to double, triple check, and then last, a really quick, short guide to building even stronger, sharper, more academic sounding sentences for when you're going through the revision. For those of you at YouTube, thank you all for tuning in, and take care. Check out those other videos. You can spend just a whole weekend with the Academic Support Center Wednesday night writing workshop videos and kind of get a little mini class done.